All right, welcome to the first of its kind, world-changing manufacturers network. Lisa Ryan has her ears to the ground and her heart in the game. Get ongoing education and new connections right here with Lisa and the Manufacturers Network. Buckle your seat, listen, and spread the word. Here's Lisa.
Hey, I'm Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. Today, we're joined by Ben Wynne. He's the CTO of Intrepid Automation. This is a company reimagining how automation and additive manufacture work together. With deep roots in embedded systems, 3D printing, and scalable production, Ben has spent his career turning advanced tech into real-world manufacturing tools. So, Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. Pleasure to be here.
So share with us a little bit about your background and what led you to doing what you do with Intrepid.
Sure. Intrepid is really focusing on building high-speed industrial additive manufacturing systems, focusing on aerospace, defense, and industrial applications, things like casting, tooling, all of the things that kind of are being used in order to produce a part. We were founded back in 2017 in San Diego with the idea that 3D printing had been around for quite a while. It needed to move beyond prototyping into kind of a more true production context. A couple of reasons why it hasn't, from quality to scalability to consistency to cost. So at Intrepid's core, we focus on a proprietary large format printing technology built around DLP, which is digital light processing, as well as automation, both from a software and hardware perspective, to bring factory of the future concepts to reality. We have over 20 granted US patents and a range of customers in aerospace, defense, and industrial. A little bit about myself. I started my career at HP Labs. I'm a computer scientist and engineer, and was in a very fortunate position that my mandate was to look far out. My mandate was to look 10, 20 years in the future, take newer emerging technologies or technologies that were being invented, and kind of smush them together into an opportunity that HP could take advantage of. One of those core technologies that kind of captivated me 2 decades ago was 3D printing. And we were obviously using it for prototyping. And that kind of really lit the fire underneath me of how do we use additive as just another tool in conventional manufacturing? What are the reasons why it hasn't been? And so the core question that me and my incredibly talented co-founders of Intrepid tried to solve is, how do we industrialize additive manufacturing so that it can scale like any other manufacturing process?
So for manufacturers who haven't stepped into additives yet, like where do you see the first or most practical fit?
Great question. I think additive has been challenged by being this kind of catch-all silver bullet. It can do anything. It can make anything. It's the Star Trek replicator, right? That everyone has been desperate to see. In reality, we need a much more pragmatic approach. We need to use additive for what it's good at in some very specific applications. And we have a very strong approach to that, in that we want to be a catalyst for existing manufacturing infrastructure in the US and use additive as just a tool in that to make it better, versus promising that an additive printer can make all the parts you want with all the mechanical properties and all the regulatory that you want for all these highly valuable use cases. So a little bit of a different approach.
So when you think of additive manufacturing, if people are not really familiar with the technology or the types of materials, because like you said, you hear about 3D printing and basically they think that I can print just about anything with any material. So what's the realistic view of what additive manufacturing can do?
Appreciate that. I'll use the specific example of what we're focusing on to answer that question, if I may. If you take a look at metal part production, additive in metal part production, when it comes to things like metal printing, it's been around a long time, but there's still a massive demand for more conventionally produced parts. Sand casting as a way to make metal parts, or importantly, investment casting, which is how jewelry is made, but it also happens to be how anything from medical implants to the most advanced aerospace components are made today. So we kind of asked ourselves the question, in order to get around the limitations of the material sets in additive, how can we create a technology that works symbiotically with existing ways of making stuff in order to make the same parts that people need, but with a digital front end? And so when I say that, I mean, we print plastic parts that go through partner foundries in order to be turned into metal parts using an investment casting approach. There's a lot of value to that which I'd love to go into later. But it's really about how do we enable more net new capacity from existing US infrastructure that may have, eroded over time. How do we invest in domestic infrastructure and give it more capability?
So you've worked across both the traditional and the additive spaces. So what does it look like when a company really blends those two?
There's been a couple of really good examples of when that kind of lightning in a bottle has been captured. I think one example is if you're familiar with Invisalign or teeth straightening.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, literally one of the biggest applications of mass production of 3D printing. That's an instance where it works. Every single tooth mold is a 3D printed part that then gets vacuformed over the top. The big leading customers people out there are producing over 2 million unique parts a day using additive. It's an example where in a constrained use case with automation wrapped around it, all the way from software to hardware, it does work. And so we're taking a kind of a similar approach with a focus on some specific aerospace applications in order to digitize that metal part production. So plastics are the way to make metal parts that can keep the regulatory intact, for example, and keep the supply chain intact and scale, where maybe some applications for metal printing kind of fall short.
So speaking of supply chain, there's a lot of talk about reshoring as well as supply chain resilience. So how is automation actually helping manufacturers to pull that off?
I think we're seeing AI, agentic AI, robotics and automation and things like 3D printing. For the first time, people are taking a step back and looking holistically at how that is going to enable a more dynamic reindustrialization of the US. What's incredible is we're starting to see these technologies being taken seriously, not just in a centralized factory context, all the way out to depots or even in the theater of war itself to create very nimble and dynamic supply chains. We're seeing the theater of war change. We're seeing the way that things have been done not lining up with reality anymore. So we need a much more dynamic supply chain, and putting these technologies out on the edge are really enabling that.
Smaller and mid-sized manufacturers often want to innovate, but they don't have those massive R&D budgets. So what's the smartest way for them to collaborate with tech providers like Intrepid?
I think the best way to collaborate is really around open communication. The way that we engage with our customer base is through deep collaboration and talking about the problem first and foremost. We don't start with buy a system, buy a machine, whether it solves your problem or not. We like to sit down and create not a vendor relationship, but a true partnership. What are your problems? What do you want to do in the future? What are your bottlenecks? And work collaboratively with them to solve that, even down to the point of creating custom or unique solutions that can help their particular application or solve their particular problem. So I think we've got to break free of simple vendor buy-sell relationships. And if we're going to solve this, what is a large problem, a multidisciplinary problem, old manufacturing methods, new regulatory, material science, robotics, AI, it takes a group of people all coming together and collaborating openly and all benefiting from the outcome. So we want to benefit by our customers benefiting, not simply by selling them a machine or a piece of technology.
Yeah. And one of the things that, is on everybody's mind right now is workforce. Not only finding people, making sure that we're creating the type of workplace culture that keeps them, but also eliminating some of that fear of the technology replacing them in their jobs. So looking at that workforce side, what are the skills or rules that are most critical for manufacturers to build up right now?
That's a great question. I think every industry, as you say, is having a real challenge finding and retaining talent, and generic manufacturing, foundries, machine shops, etc., are all being plagued by this as well. I think just as the word computer used to describe a job title, like people were computers, computers now have enabled entire new industries to be born. I'm a big believer that when things like humanoid robotics, AI, start to take some of those more manual jobs out of the workforce, they are going to be replaced by a lot more new opportunities and new jobs that we can't even predict necessarily right now. So I see displacement as an opportunity for growth, not as a path to destruction. Makes sense.
And the other thing along those same lines is that we have this critical mass. We have the people leaving, the silver tsunami, all the baby boomers leaving and taking the history and just the way that they've been doing things forever. And then you have a generation that is non-existent in manufacturing. And then now we're trying to attract Gen Z and millennials into manufacturing. So again, you have the people who may be a little bit more afraid of it and the people who were born with it. So what are some keys as far as just making sure that we keep the history and the knowledge that we need, that tribal knowledge, that legacy, while educating the people that are coming into the workforce with the skills that they need?
I think we are at a real disadvantage in that the people have moved away from making. It's been outsourced. It's something you order from overseas if you want to make something or get something. And I think there's a healthy tension there. I think preserving knowledge that's on its way out of the workforce is imperative. I'm not sure if we have time to do that through education conventionally, generationally. I think we really need to turn ourselves towards looking at AI and how can we capture that information before they leave the workforce, use that to train agentic systems that can then be the teachers of the generations of the future and pass that knowledge on and grow that knowledge over time. So I think we have to break the cycle of what like apprenticeship or education means and use the tools that are at our disposal now to capture knowledge that is really, really going to be lost. One example of that is a military application, a part for a tank. And I got told by the guy that's in charge of the supply chain, I have drawings for this, but if you make them, the part exactly to the drawing, to spec, it won't fit on the tank. And that's like an example of how back in the day, knowledge was lost, which means we now can't produce the parts that we need. So I feel humans are an equivalent, human skill sets are an equivalent of that one simple example. We need to capture that knowledge, put it into systems that can retain it and treat it safely, and use that as a foundation to teach the next generation.
Where have you seen that, or what are some examples of you seeing that being successfully done? What are organizations doing, whether it be using AI or just to make sure that the next generations are prepared?
I would say that it's a tough one. I would say that not everyone has cracked that code. I think it's something that people are taking seriously for the first time. Even during my time at HP, there was a lot of generational talent that was lost through people retiring and leaving the workforce. And then when you came back, you have to almost do this kind of digital archaeology to try and get some of that knowledge back. And maybe there's going to be a skill set, a job title for that in the future. But I feel organizations that continue to hire new talent and get people excited about what they're doing. Take casting, for example. It's not a glamorous job, but it produces some of the most important parts that are needed for national security, that keep planes in the air, that keep people healthy. It is not glamorous, but the use cases are. And I think if we can capture people's imagination that digital AI and the legacy processes can work together and coexist, I think that's going to create a much more compelling draw for next generations versus just going into kind of more conventional, kind of hyped up opportunities today. I think making things, people still fundamentally want to make something and hold it in their hands.
An interesting question. You may or may not be able to answer this, but what do you think are some of the questions that manufacturers never thought that they would have to ask themselves when it comes to these technologies, but they really do?
I think everyone's looking for answers that we don't have the answer to yet.
Yeah.
I think, whether it be the military, whether it be the Department of War, Department of Defense, or any company that makes something today, what at least we're seeing is that they are asking those questions. We don't know the answers. We don't even know necessarily the right questions to ask, but everyone is saying, how does the changing geopolitical landscape, how does supply chains become more robust? How do they become more dynamic? What are the technologies that can use? How is AI going to disrupt my business? And it really is Promethean. Additive and AI are going to disrupt so many things. They've just had a lot of false starts. So I think right now we're seeing this perfect storm, but in a positive way, where everyone is like opportunity and technology meeting capability for the first time in decades. And so I don't have a playbook for that to answer your question, but it's going to be an interesting story to watch unfold for sure.
And I think that's part of it, because I just wanted to see from the standpoint of, with all of these people asking themselves the same questions, they have some kind of options or just different ways of looking at things, because we not only have that with technology, but then we also have regulations and certifications that can either slow things down or make adoption safer. So what's changing in those areas that manufacturers should know about?
I think regulatory is one of the most important hurdles. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should be able to. I've got examples from colleagues from back in the day where they produced the first metal printed medical implant for shoulders, and they had to recall all of the first implants, even though they passed every test that they threw at it. So I think making sure to invest in the regulatory so it can keep up with new technologies and these new technologies is imperative, while also being incredibly sensitive to why they're there in the first place. If you could metal print replacement parts for in-use vehicles, for example, today that have these tight regulatory controls, technically you would have to recertify every one of these parts. You'd have to flight test one of these parts, and there are many hundreds of thousands of parts out there. It's a hurdle that's impossible to overcome. So the question is, how do you maintain regulatory while adding new capability to it and help to guide that over time? I think that's why my approach, Intrepid's approach, is to collaborate with the existing supply chain, leave everything intact, as much of it intact as possible, but remove the hard tooling or the tooling from the front end. So instead of making a wax part in an injection mold that then becomes the metal part you need, we 3D print the wax equivalent. And that means that the printed part doesn't ever end up in the plane or in the vehicle or in the human body. It's still being manufactured the way it has been forever, using casting, using the same suppliers, using the same metal from the same suppliers in the same way. It's just the shape that's being created digitally, so that's what I feel really passionate about, is trying to keep that regulatory for existing manufacturing as intact as possible, while also investing in and educating people as to how the regulatory needs to evolve and change over time.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that manufacturers make when they start thinking about using additive manufacturing?
I think you've got to not drink the Kool-Aid is the fundamental thing. I think I pride myself on, my company prides itself on proving that we can do what we say before a transaction to take place. So I think it's really imperative that before a company jumps in and says, I'll just buy 50 machines because it says it can do everything I need, that there is a deep collaboration initially to validate that it does what you want in the way that it does from a cost, quality, speed, and consistency standpoint. So our approach is a little bit different. We're not just trying to sell hardware. We're trying to demonstrate that it works and then benefit from a long-term collaboration with those customers. So I'll say, don't drink the Kool-Aid and validate that it does what you need.
Yeah, exactly. So if you had to pick just one near-term innovation that'll truly move the needle on the factory floor, what would you bet on?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Get out the crystal ball.
I know. I hope I don't look back on this in a few years and I'm completely wrong. I think the question is not so much a particular technology, it's the convergence of multiple. I think the innovation that's happening, if you look at the companies that are really innovating in things like aerospace and defense, like SpaceX and stuff like that, they are combining multiple legacy technologies together, but in a very novel way. And so it's like that factory of the future thing. It's not one tool. It's not one piece. We've all got to step back. And I think the biggest innovation to manufacturing is to not do it the way that everyone has previously, not do it with labor. Let's look at what happens when, agentic AI, when humanoid robotics, when additive, all of these things become capable enough. What does the factory of the future need to look like? What does infrastructure need to look like? I think the innovation needs to be the holistic view. We need to look at it. It's the integration. That's the biggest bottleneck right now, not a particular technology.
So share a little bit about your process when you're taking customers through the process of figuring out how to work together, what to do. What does that look like? And maybe if you have a before and after success story to go along with that.
I'll talk in general terms, if I may, without naming names. But take product development in general, right? Or say there's a company that has tens of thousands of components that it makes using conventional methods like sound casting. They're reaching a bottleneck in that they've got a warehouse full of tooling for sound casting match plates. If you're familiar with the term, it's like a mold that you smush into the sound to make the cavity. But they were made decades ago. They were made by hand. They're made out of wood, and they've been sitting in a warehouse rotting for decades. And those are core parts that are needed for that company to stay in business going forward. We came in, we collaborated, and we said, how can we digitize this? how can we make it so that you don't have to rely on these legacy match plates? You can capture, preserve, and digitize all of these geometries that you need going forward, so that if the worst were to happen, if those tools do fail, if they are not recoverable, you can still make the parts that you did. So we endeavored to use our technology to create a digital match plate. Essentially, we 3D print the tooling, and that can be done very quickly and on demand, so that you don't have to store all these things. You can keep your current assets alive using digital tools. Then you can put them to bed. And then when you have a new design or need them again, you can print another tool very quickly. So it's kind of an example of kind of the need. And how we did that was we literally showed them. We produced match plates for them. We showed them how it can be done in our technology. We talked about cost, throughput, quality. All those things were validated. And at the end of that journey is when they in-source the technology themselves and are using it in that exact way to solve those fundamental problems.
Okay, so here's what I'm seeing in my brain. A manufacturer has a wooden part that has been on their shelf for 40 years, along with hundreds of other parts that are just sitting there that they have to go somewhere in the factory and find. Yep. So you would go in there and basically take down all the measurements for that and digitize it and have it on the computer. So when they needed that specific part, they could just press the button and it'll print that specific part.
Correct. It will essentially enable them to have a digital tool room where instead of it being a massive storage facility with thousands of match plates in, maybe they keep 10, 20 alive at any moment in time. They can produce a new match plate within 4 hours. Within a day, they can be in production the next day of a part that they didn't have tooling for previously. So that's how we can really use new technology to make legacy manufacturing. As you said, some of that kind of tribal knowledge, that generational knowledge, we can make that more dynamic and nimble. Whereas before, you may have to wait months for one of these tools to arrive. To be able to start production the next day is unheard of, but will help create very dynamic supply chains going forward.
Awesome. All right. So if somebody did want to continue the conversation, find out a little bit more about what you do or take the next step, what's the best way to get in touch?
The best way is you can go to our website to find out more about the products and technologies that we have. But I'm a simple person. If you want to talk to me, reach out on LinkedIn and I will respond when I have time, for sure. I'd love to continue the conversation. Thank you, Lisa.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here too.
I'm Lisa Ryan, and this is the Manufacturers Network Podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Manufacturers Network Podcast. Do me a favor and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can grow this network and connect more fantastic folks just like you. You can either send your buddies to the website at manufacturers-network.com or share the Manufacturers Network podcast on your LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or wherever you and your industry friends hang out. The bigger and faster we grow the network, the stronger and deeper the community we'll all have. Thanks again, and I appreciate you.